Elliott Smith is my favorite musician. For the past 15 years, I've been collecting all of his official releases, leaked B-sides, unfinished demos, just everything I could find, but I've always overlooked a big part of his work. All this time, I've been ignoring Heatmiser. Not that one, there we go. Elliott Smith's first outing as a professional musician was as co-lead singer and guitarist of this band. Why they chose the name of a vaguely creepy character in an animated Christmas movie that was just 17 years old at the time, I can't even fathom. Oh, but it does remind me. Look out for the band I'll be starting next year. Will be called Tom Hanks and the Polar Express. Anyway, I gave Heatmiser a shot years ago, but it turns out I wasn't ready for what they had to offer. Coming back to them now, without the burden of expecting them to sound like Elliott's solo work, I found Heatmiser to be something totally unexpected that I never knew I needed in my life. In the late 80s, Elliott Smith was attending college in Massachusetts. While he lacked faith in the value of academia, and would indeed never find much use for his degree in philosophy and legal theory, he did get something important out of university. This is where he met and befriended Neil Gust, with whom he would perform live music throughout his time there, and when he returned to his hometown of Portland, Oregon upon graduation, he brought Neil with him. Elliott then recruited his high school friend Tony Lash as a drummer, and talked accomplished but reluctant bassist Brant Peterson into joining them, and Heatmiser was formed. In true do-it-yourself punk form, Tony would also engineer, mix, and master their recordings, and Neil oversaw the creation of their album art. Seeing that Elliott was so central to the creation of this band, and knowing the prolific career in music he would go on to have, you might expect that he would be the dominant force, and that you'd hear the beginnings of the fragile, angelic folk rock sound for which he has become so well known. Nothing could be further from the truth.
I keep feeling my eyes closed shut. You know I love you sincerely, but now I just wanna be still.
Yes, Elliott Smith, of all people, once tried the Pearl Jam super strained vocals thing, and in a time before his lyrics warranted that kind of force. Most of what he was shouting was sort of vague and just got repeated often to try and imply some kind of larger meaning to it. This is what shocked me the most, because I know Elliott to be a solid contender for, no exaggeration, the greatest lyricist of all time.
Secondary self for myself. A devil dog, a close call, somebody else. Your love.
Heatmiser veered dangerously close to grunge on their debut album, Dead Air, though the use of major keys and jangly guitars did a lot to take the edge off. This only describes about half the band's output though, as songwriting duties were split between Elliott and Neil. Neil's songs matched the intensity of Elliott's, but differentiated themselves with a clear influence from 80s heavy metal, which lends credence to something Patton Oswalt once said.
If you were into heavy metal in the 80s, guess what? You're gay. Did you know that?
Neil Gust was openly gay in the late 80s through the early 90s, right at the exact moment when the AIDS crisis could no longer be ignored and was finally being addressed by government officials. Shining a spotlight on homosexuality for the first time also painted a target on its back, making it a heavily politicized issue about which everyone had a strong opinion. Merely being out of the closet was seen as an act of rebellion, and a cultural movement called Queercore responded by expressing LGBTQ identities in aggressive music and artwork. Heatmiser was swept up as a part of this movement, which is at most a footnote when people talk about them today, but if you were listening to them at the time, it was an unmistakable part of the experience, because Neil's songs were super, super gay. Just so we're crystal clear, I think that rules, and I am not straight myself. Now I'll let Neil demonstrate exactly what I'm talking about with Candyland, the first of his songs to appear on their first album.
Walk on the surface, get up on my knees, without the straight oxygen, it's hard to breathe. In the confusion, I can lose both hands. If a wellness pollution, the violence romance, eating alive in Candyland.
I can't say I follow exactly what's being described there, but I doubt it's just my dirty mind thinking it could be a sex act that was probably illegal in many US states under sodomy laws at the time. Now this left fans with a burning question. Was Elliott Smith gay? Rumors were fueled by the fact that he and Neil were living together, and Elliott being the absolute glam rock queen front and center in this promotional photo. But the photographer for this picture was J.J. Gonson, Elliott's girlfriend at the time. Elliott was very supportive of his friend though, and has said at this time, by that point, just about all of my friends that were men were gay. A lot of straight guys were just having kinds of conversations I couldn't really relate to. You know, like not being able to relate to jocks in high school, sorta like that. At first, Elliott and Neil's writing styles didn't really mesh, and listening to Dead Air as an album feels like you're listening to two completely different bands on shuffle. But when it came time to perform, they were all on the same wavelength, and it was clear they were onto something. They just needed some more time working together to develop a signature Heatmiser sound, and good fortune would give them all the time they needed after their debut. In a stroke of luck, Elliott was fired from his day job and went on unemployment, about which Neil has said, that was like the state giving a grant because for a year he didn't work. His process just went boom. It was amazing to watch. Escaping the soul-killing drudgery of forced toil for survival led to an unprecedented flood of creative output for Elliott. He followed the September release of Dead Air with an EP of original Heatmiser music in April, his debut solo album in July, and Heatmiser's second full-length the following September. The solo album was a flight of fancy he had recorded on a whim and had to be talked into releasing at all. But while it would prove to be a major step in his artistic self-discovery, neither he nor his fans were ready to embrace his shift to acoustic explorations of traumatic life events just yet. For Heatmiser's sophomore release, titled Cop and Speeder, many of his songs bore the trademarks of the debut, still grungy and angry and repetitive, but he cleaned up his raspy vocals, wrote clearer, more personal lyrics, and wasn't afraid to dip into slower compositions. Despite Elliott's rapid growth as an artist, Cop and Speeder is, if anything, a showcase of Neil's talents. He gets the opening track, the album's single, and the line from which the title is derived, this sick burn, you're more cop than speeder. Neil's songwriting had shifted dramatically since Dead Air, and no longer clashed with Elliott's but complemented it, meeting his fast-paced repetition of powerful riffs with slow builds to explosive payoffs. Best of all, 5 of the 6 songs Neil contributes are blatantly about that gay shit. Most of these songs deal with the unique and not so unique difficulties he faced in the dating scene, but the opening track, Disappearing Ink, cut to the core of the broader queer experience. The song goes through the difficulty of discovering oneself, the angst of enduring erasure, and the empowerment of refusing to accept being treated as inferior, all in just 2.5 minutes.
You can't cure me, or write me off with a wink. You can't even catch me if I've been drunk and disappearing ink. Come here, silencing, kiss me quiet.
Elliott takes the momentum established by the first song and builds on it with 2 songs of his own, demonstrating his new, cleaner singing and maturation in his songwriting while setting a blazing pace for the album. After that, however, is a 3rd consecutive song from him, and this one would have fit right in on Dead Air. The beats per minute take a dip, and even the vocals are noticeably more gruff than the rest of Cop and Speeder. Unsurprisingly, this song, and a similarly out-of-place one by Neil later in the album, were released as a single the year previous, then re-recorded for inclusion here. Neil's second song, titled Why Did I Decide to Stay, was selected to represent the album as its lone single. It's a brooding tune about the aftermath of a regrettable hookup, featuring a lot of build-up to the most fun you'll ever have, singing along to the words, Because I'm Lonely. The subject, while decidedly sexual in nature, is kept relatable by never specifying the gender of the person he slept with, though it is perhaps notable that the video doesn't feature any women. From here, Elliott and Neil trade up-tempo tracks for a while, until Elliott slows things down with Antonio Carlos Jobim, then slams the brakes with Something to Lose. These songs gave Heatmiser fans a taste of Elliott's darker side, and at the time, the melancholic warbling he would ultimately find himself pigeonholed into was the last thing people expected. These are still decidedly Heatmiser songs though, replacing the energy of the faster songs with the sheer impact the rhythm section delivers with each note, and they both have a moment where they break into full-on rock. These uncharacteristically contemplative songs could have stopped the album dead in its tracks, but instead make for a welcome change of pace, and the rest of the album honors that by taking a more laid-back approach. The mood lightens considerably, not so much in terms of lyrics. The remaining songs are about discontentment with interpersonal relationships and substance abuse, but they sound catchy and upbeat, with the closing tracks, Trapdoor and Nightcap, being two of my favorites on the album. And very hard to say in such close succession without accidentally saying Night Trap. Everything I've just described about what makes Cop and Speeders so good would never cross your mind while actually listening to it. The strength of the album is the way it effortlessly holds your attention and just takes you along for a ride without making you think too hard, with no hard swerves into completely different genres or challenging roadblocks. The depth is there if you want to explore it, but it's far more important to say that it provides what I've always loved about music since buying my first Blink-182 CD when I was 13. If an LGBT lifestyle happens to be part of your lived experience as well, the album works on a whole other level as a forgotten piece of queer art, showing the kind of uncompromising messages people were putting out in a time when their identities were criminalized, even potentially life-threatening. Those of us that identify with the reclaimed slur queer do so to acknowledge that there are people who think our very nature is worthy of mockery and degradation, and taking that term by choice shows our history of defying this stance and overcoming it. Queercore art like Heatmiser captures a snapshot of a moment in time before LGBT identities were co-opted by corporate interests, sanitized of countercultural implications, and sold back to us by the very people spearheading efforts that would have devastating effects on our lives. The punk ethos of this movement serves as an important reminder that assimilation is a carrot on a stick. Chasing it only serves to abandon the more vulnerable members of our community and weaken our overall cause. Elliott had his second solo album out within a year of Cop and Speeder's release, and was rapidly building a fanbase that would eclipse that of his band. More importantly, he had discovered his true calling, and there was no going back to the heavier sound of Heatmiser. The band probably should have just ended there, but Elliott tried to continue upholding his obligations to his friends while also writing and touring as a solo act. Tensions between members of Heatmiser skyrocketed as Elliott pulled them further and further from their signature sound, risking the future of a band that had just signed to a major label, Virgin Records, and had the potential to be something big. Shortly after Cop and Speeder was completed, Elliott fired bassist Brant Peterson, citing his reason for doing so as, quote, "That guy was such an asshole," adding, "His sense of humor was such that he always had to be making fun of somebody." After his departure from Heatmiser, Brant left Portland for graduate school and never worked in music again. His position was filled by Sam Coombs from the band The Donner Party, but the dynamic of the band had shifted. The entire rhythm section now operated as a utilitarian tool rather than the driving force it had been, as the punk, metal, and grunge influences were all drained from their sound, both singers instead producing a sort of power pop that was devoid of aggression. If you were following Heatmiser solely through radio play, then over the course of just 3 years, you heard them go from sounding like this to this. The strain of such a rapid change proved too much to bear, and Heatmiser broke up in 1996, just before the release of their final album, Mike City Sons. The creation of this record was profoundly embattled. Originally, Tony was set to be the producer, but Elliott opted to instead bring in the producers of Beck's Mellow Gold. A rift was driven in their friendship that would take years to heal, and Tony quit the band before their final tour. As for Elliott and Neil, I've seen reports saying that they stayed friendly through the breakup and held a high degree of respect for each other's creative processes. I've also seen contradictory statements suggesting Neil was hurt by Elliott's apparent disdain for the music they had made together, and that towards the end, they weren't on speaking terms. I get the impression that no one really wants to talk too much about what went down, and the little information that's available has been interpreted in some very different ways. Regardless of the circumstances, the end of Heatmiser was complicated, painful, and inevitable. After Heatmiser, Tony Lash shifted his focus from performance to production, and works as a music producer to this day. Sam Coombs founded the band Quasi and collaborated with artists in the booming Portland music scene for years to come. Elliott Smith's solo career took off in earnest, and he soon dominated the independent rock scene, became a staple on film soundtracks, played the Oscars, and broke into mainstream success. Neil Gust also continued to create music, forming a new band the same year Heatmiser ended, the unfortunately named Number 2. Now I know what you're thinking, but that name is not a self-deprecating dig about having been second fiddle to a musical legend. It's just a reference to this being his second band on Virgin Records, but it makes the 2 albums they put out almost impossible to find today. They are still out there though, and well worth the effort it takes to dig them up. Neil stuck with the power pop sound of Mike City Sons and perfected it, making more catchy, accessible music while covering the same sort of lyrical themes we've seen from him before. He even wrote a song you've been singing along with for years without ever having heard it. Okay, that's not exactly a highlight, but most of their music is excellent. Elliott appears on both Number 2 albums as a guest musician and engineer, as do Tony and Sam from Heatmiser, everyone having put the sour note on which their band ended behind them. In 2002, Elliott invited Neil to his home studio to record together. They spent 2 weeks working on a single song before Neil had to return home or risk losing his job. During this time, Neil says Elliott spoke of an interest in officially reuniting Heatmiser. Tragically, this would be the last time the two would see each other. Elliott Smith died in October of 2003 after suffering 2 stab wounds to the chest that are widely believed to be self-inflicted, though the coroner's report remains inconclusive. His career had lasted only a decade, but he touched countless lives with his mastery of the craft and ability to find beauty in darkness. Although he distanced himself from the sound of Heatmiser and would even call some aspects of his work with the band an embarrassment, it's clear that it represented a fondly remembered time in his life. The celebration of Elliott's life and artwork is ongoing, and unreleased recordings still surface from time to time. The song he recorded with Neil Gust during their final meeting, titled Who's Behind the Door, was released on a charity compilation in 2011, and later added to a 2017 reissue of Number 2's second album. Heatmiser's full band rendition of the Elliott Smith solo song Christian Brothers was leaked by Tony Lash in 2013. And throughout 2019, Tony has been posting songs from bands he and Elliott played in before Heatmiser to his YouTube page. This often overlooked side of Elliott Smith shows a sort of music that he would never attempt to make again, which can make it hard to get into if you're a fan of his already. But I'd recommend checking them out whether or not that's the case, as Heatmiser provides a treasure trove of fierce, easy-to-enjoy rock, a deeper understanding of what Elliott was capable of, and an introduction to a group of musicians that he would continue to work with long after this brief but important period in his life. And that's the story of Heatmiser, folks. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. If you feel inclined to do me a favor, you can leave me a comment letting me know what you think. Should I make more videos like this? Should I retroactively not have made this one? Should I never have been born? These are all things you can decide for me in the comments section. Just be aware that my tastes lean heavily in favor of metal, and the sort of weird metal bands that even metal fans tend not to like, so if I haven't talked you out of it yet, please let me know. And thanks again.